Hi, everybody. My name is Caroline Colas. I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Thank you so much for joining us for our Lunch and Learn series, a joint series with the Whole Being Institute. Today, our guest is Sandy Campbell, and we are going to be talking about food as lifestyle medicine and learning how we can enhance our well-being during this time period. A robust immune system is our best defense against any viral infection, whether it's the common cold or the coronavirus. Fortunately, there is little risk in taking additional care of our health by eating well, exercising, and implementing positive psychology interventions. In this session, Sandy describes how she did just that. She took her health and happiness into her own hands when she changed her career, her way of eating, started practicing yoga and meditation, and began incorporating positive psychology practices into her life. Today, she is medication-free and using these healthy strategies to both boost her immunity and keep her resilient during COVID-19. Sandy will share her story along with favorite recipes and tips on how to eat well and enhance our health and well-being. And just so you know a little bit about Sandy, she holds a master's degree in counseling and human relations from Villanova University and a certificate in positive psychology, a certificate in integrative nutrition, and a 200-hour mindful yoga certification. Prior to starting her coaching business, she worked as a neuroscience specialty sales representative for a major pharmaceutical company promoting medications for depression, anxiety, and ADHD. She now likes to say that she uses food and lifestyle as her meds. Welcome to the call, Sandy. It's so great to have you with us.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for asking me. You're doing wonderful things in the world. Thank you for doing these.
Yeah, well, this is just our way of staying connected. You know, we really wanted to stay connected with our community. We have a really great community here at the JCC and as part of the Whole Being Institute too, and I'm so glad you get to meet them. Speaking of the Whole Being Institute, how are you affiliated, or how did you get associated with the Whole Being Institute? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, well, as I was entering into my health journey, I'll talk about that a little bit when I introduce myself in a moment, but as I entered, can you hear me okay, Caroline? Okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. As I entered into my health journey, I pretty much entered through the nutrition portal. And as I kind of moved through the different areas, I realized, I wanted to learn in integrative nutrition a little bit more about how to move my body, about how to practice mindfulness and yoga. So I became a yoga teacher. And then I also wanted to learn a little bit more about positive psychology, because when we're looking at an integrative model, we tend to kind of go in different directions with that. One great box opens up another one. So I joined the Whole Being Institute for a couple of classes at Kripalu, and then I joined their certificate in positive psychology a couple of years ago, and they just recently asked me to be part of their staff. So I'm a teaching assistant for the next SIP program, which I believe Phoebe could correct me, but I think maybe the registration is the last day to register for that is today, if anyone is interested. But that's how I became familiar with the Whole Being Institute. Very much a life-changing experience for me.
Fantastic. Well, we haven't had anybody really talk about nutrition, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say, because it makes sense, doesn't it, that we could actually, they say, what is it in athletics? The best defense is a great offense. So when I think about nutrition, or when I think about healthy lifestyle practices, I think about it as my offense. I think about, wait a second, especially when I'm feeling anxious and like I don't have much control over certain things, but I do have control about what I choose to eat, what I choose to drink, and some of those small healthy lifestyle practices. And we know, being a health and wellness program director, I know that small changes make a big difference. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Do you want to give us some context? Do you want to start your slideshow and
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about us?
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and pull my slides up here and make sure that we can get everything working. Can you see them okay, Caroline?
Yes.
Fabulous, fabulous. Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of context. I love how you gave me the perfect segue into small shifts, because that is a large takeaway that I hope all of you can leave our webinar with today. So I have several slides that I've prepared for you, and I'm excited to kind of present those to you and get your thoughts in a couple of areas of what you're thinking. Hopefully you can, as I mentioned, grab a couple of tips that you might be able to add into your own life. And if you have a pen and paper available, please have that. I'd love for you to take some notes and write down some ideas that you have. And I will ask you at a couple of points if you want to type in the chat, you know, how you might add some of those tips in. That would be great. But I mentioned a little bit about my story. I always do like to tell a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I entered the health and wellness world through healthy eating. And I worked for a major pharmaceutical company for 10 years. I was a sales rep who promoted drugs for diabetes, for acid reflux. I moved into neuroscience, where I was promoting products for depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar. And during that time, you know, work-life balance was a little stressful for me. My husband had just started medical school and then residency and fellowship. We had 1, 2, 3 babies, and we didn't have any family close by to kind of rely on an everyday emergency basis. So my job was a lot of times to take food into offices, and these were, you know, pizzas and sandwiches. And so I was eating that during the day, maybe swinging through a drive-through, and it started to catch up with me. I started to have really very distressing stomach issues. My allergies became very, very difficult to handle. And then of course, you know, cognitively, I felt a little fuzzy. My mood was down at times. My energy was low. So I'm sure a lot of you have experienced that when you're trying to juggle home and life, whatever your own story is. But I worked for the company for about 10 years, and I was on a couple of medications, getting ready to go on another one for some of these problems that I was having. And eventually I hit a point where I thought, I've got to do something different here. This is not working for me. I stopped working for the pharmaceutical company at a certain point, but the signs and symptoms were still there, still not feeling good. So I luckily found a school for integrative nutrition, and I changed my way of eating around, and I couldn't believe the changes. I couldn't believe what power that I had over my own body, and how small shifts make such a massive, massive change in your health. So I show this pictorial of, I share this with my clients when we're taking a look at how we want to make changes, but honestly, it's based on my own story. I entered through healthy eating. As I mentioned, I changed my movement around. I became a yoga teacher. I learned more about mindfulness. My sleep improved. I was more likely to reduce my stressors and work on self-care. And then I became acquainted with the Wellbeing Institute, and I was able to add in positive psychology techniques as well. So I felt so much better. And it was just because I was able to bring these tips and small shifts into my life. So hopefully that's what I can help you to do today. Our lives have been very turned upside down over the past 2 months, so unexpectedly and sadly with COVID-19. And this talk would have sounded a lot different a couple of months ago. Now we have a lot of different challenges as we look at nutrition and we look at movement. So we're going to kind of weave that through what our current environment really is. So I like to use this cute little acronym of taking your meds. I believe that I have borrowed this acronym from Mo Gawad at the Happiness Summit, World Happiness Summit. He used this MEDS, and I found it was very appropriate for my talk. So we're going to be talking about the physical shifts that we can make in our health, and I'll tell you exactly what MEDS means in a couple of minutes here. But let's move to probably a model that you're very familiar with by now. The Wellbeing Institute likes to use this wonderful pictorial of what whole being health looks like and all the different elements that go into holistic health. It's a very balanced kind of way of looking at yourself. You can see my children here. I was coming out of a yoga class one time. We were on vacation, and they were striking a balance pose. They thought that was hilarious. So here they are showing balance. Inspire does show what a person can be at their very, very best, what they reach towards. We have several elements that we look at when we're looking at Spire. We have spiritual, our meaning and our purpose and our connection to a higher being. We have physical, which is what we're going to talk about today, caring for the body and the way that we move, we eat, and we sleep. Intellectual, what we're interested in, what are our hobbies, what really fires us up. Relational, our relations with ourselves and also with others. And right now, this has become a really important quadrant as well, as we've been sequestered probably with just a few family members or a few important people in our lives. So it's important to maintain those relationships and also be so gentle with ourselves as well. And then emotional, which is really tapping into these positive psychology techniques to help to raise resiliency, gratitude, all these different positive emotions. So when we look at the Spire model here, it's really fun to see how am I feeling when we take a look at this integrative model of health. It's a nice visual. And if I could engage you right now with a pen and paper, we're going to do what we like to call a Spire check-in. And it's a way that we can kind of see how are we doing in some of these different realms. I like to talk about these circles as juggling balls. So often all of them can't be high. I'll pick on my son for a minute. He's very high in physical a lot of times. He's very physically fit and he's 17, he likes to work out a lot. But if he is training for a certain competition, he might tell you that his relational is low. And he'll say, I feel lonely, I miss my friends, because he's not in his busy day spending as much time as he would like with his friends. So he would see his R as low and his P as high. So you can see up here at the top, you have a high and you have a low. And so if you could, think about yourself right now, how you feel right now. And this model shows with the arrow how this person has ranked her spiritual as high, her physical is low, intellectual is a little bit higher, relation. So it's maybe look at a scale from 1 to 10. And where would you rank yourself today, right now? So I wonder if you take a moment and just give yourself a ranking in all of these 5 different quadrants. And I'll give you a moment or two to do that. Does everybody have a moment here to join back up? And I'd like to ask you, how many of you, when you looked at your Spire check-in, felt that your physical was a little bit lower than you might like it? And Caroline, maybe you can help me with the chat, or if people want to raise their hands, if they want to say yes, or if they have any thoughts around this, where they found their physical to be during this time.
Do you want a qualification like low, high, or a number?
A number is good, or high or low is fine. Whatever people would like to offer is fine. Do you feel like your physical is higher than normal or lower? How do you feel today?
So we're looking at lower.
Lower.
Physical is low. It's a 5, lower than normal, lowest in the Spire, medium to high, lower than normal, lower than 5. Lots of walking, missing gym, a bit lower. Exercise is really good, food pretty good, sleep could be better, lower. Physical was high, however, due to emotional and relationship issues, I'm a bit less energetic. So I guess it's all related. Mine is lower since COVID-19, lower than I want, higher during this time because I'm doing more exercise, definitely low. Normally this would be a great opportunity to go to a gym, right, more often, but yeah. So a couple people, of course, is because we're all snowflakes, right, humans, but
love that.
A little bit up and down there. Maybe men, it seems like the consensus is a little bit lower than normal.
A little bit lower than normal. And you know, that's how I have felt as well. And even though I've had a lot more time on my hands, I've been in my house a lot, I've had plenty of opportunities to really engage in the physical in various different ways, which we'll talk about in a minute. I found myself low on that as well. So thank you for sharing all that. So I've been asked specifically to come and talk with you today about the physical. and about how we can really tap into this physical, because when physical is off, everything else is off as well. And it is all very, very related. So when we're talking about meds, it's a little play, as I mentioned. We're going to be talking about food, how we move naturally. I like to use that word rather than exercise. I like to talk about movement, meditation, and also how we are sleeping. So I'm first of all going to start out by saying I was very lucky that I was able to put together a cluster of symptoms in thinking about how I was feeling all those years ago. I was able to put together a cluster of symptoms and get a loose diagnosis on kind of how I was feeling. And the term that I learned from Dr. Mark Hyman is called the FLS syndrome. So I don't know if anyone has ever heard of this, maybe you have, but the FLS syndrome actually is very technical. It's very pervasive right now. It actually stands for the I'm not sure what's going on right now. I just know that I feel like crap syndrome. So the FLS syndrome. So making a little joke here, but can I see a show of hands of how many people over the past couple of months have felt the FLS syndrome in a pretty significant way?
We're getting quite a few yeses.
Quite a few yeses. Isn't that funny? I can't take credit again. This is Dr. Mark Hyman from the Institute of Functional Medicine. I love this, the FLS syndrome. So let me show a picture of you. I actually had, or a picture of me. I actually had my son take a picture of me when I had the FLS syndrome. It kind of looks like this. In my sweatpants on the couch, low energy, having not gone out and walked or exercised that day, not sure who's gonna make dinner that night, and in previous days, who was gonna drive my child to soccer practice that night. So this is kind of what the FLS syndrome looks like as we're poking some fun at this. But in all honesty, the symptoms and signs that I was feeling, oftentimes, they're related to low-grade inflammation. Inflammation in the form of dark circles under your eyes, headaches, joint pain, upset stomach, weight gain, skin rashes, acne, allergies, poor sleep, bloating. We also have a lot of emotional symptoms as well. Low mood, tired, irritable, foggy thinking. So this low-grade inflammation, I like to think of this as my body throwing up this red flag. You know, think about those college mascots that run across the field with this big flag, and they're trying to get your attention. And these signs and symptoms are our body saying, help, I really need you to pay some attention to me right now. There's some underlying issues that you need to address. Maybe they're food sensitivities, maybe there's some other issues there as well, and we need to really take a look at those. So low-grade inflammation. And what happens when this inflammation goes unchecked for too long is it can turn into disease. All diseases are based in this silent inflammation. And the World Health Organization said that the deadliest non-communicable diseases worldwide, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. And it's been estimated that we could eliminate 90% of diabetes, 80% of heart disease, and 35% of some cancers with lifestyle habits. Lifestyle habits. I mentioned before, I used to promote a drug for diabetes. And I know now that if a person were to go on an anti-inflammatory foods diet for 30 days, it's been proven by research that you can not only stop the progression of diabetes, but you can reverse diabetes within 30 days. You can increase your insulin sensitivity, decrease your overall blood glucose. So to me, this is empowerment. And this is really, really good news that we have as much power as we do by taking a look at these different lifestyle habits. Dan Buettner has a wonderful TED Talk on his Blue Zones data. And I'd love to introduce you to Dan Buettner. What he did was he partnered with National Geographic, and they went across the world taking a look at people who lived to be 100. And they wanted to see in which parts of the world that these people congregated. And there were 5 blue zones that were identified. And then they went and they asked these people, what is it that you're doing? You're so healthy. And then he moved into happiness as well, which is super cool because they're two sides of the same coin. But 5 out of the 9 of these top habits that these centenarians had were related to this P, to this physical. We've got moving naturally, downshifting in the form of meditation or mindfulness. We have the 80% rule, which is I believe it's in Japan, they only eat to 80% full and no further. A plant slant, so they eat a very plant-based diet, and then wine at 5. So 5 out of these 9 are related to these meds: meditate, exercise, diet, and sleep. We're actually going to start with food. We're going to start with nutrition because it seems like always when I talk with clients, and in my own situation as well, food is where you kind of need to start to get the most bang for your buck. So let's start by talking about the microbiome. The microbiome, I like to show this picture of soil because you're not going to grow a healthy plant if you don't have healthy soil. So our microbiome is in our gut. It's known as the second brain. And in this second brain, we have viruses, bacteria, fungi, all kinds of microorganisms that are working, hopefully in harmony, to help us to be our best, healthiest self. Sometimes they're not working so much in harmony. And that's when we start to see some of these signs and symptoms that I mentioned earlier. Here's why the microbiome, some other reasons why it's so important. The gut contains 100 million neurons, more than the spinal cord. 70% of our immune system is housed in our gut. So we're talking about our health here. 70% of our immune system is in our gut. 95% of serotonin is located in our gut. And some of the other neurotransmitters as well are largely housed in our gut. So there's a large connection between food and mood. We take food into our body, it becomes our blood, it becomes our cells, it moves through our organs, it circulates brain to the gut, brain to the gut. And so there's a feedback loop that happens here. So what we eat very much does affect our brain. So I mentioned earlier when I was making a joke about the FLS syndrome, most of the time people will present with energy as being one of their main complaints. I have no energy. I'm so tired. I have no energy. So let's first of all talk about energy changing foods. Caffeine, can increase your attention. Undoubtedly, I definitely use it for that reason. But oftentimes, if I've had too much, I might start to crave some foods that I know aren't so great for me. Caffeine can do that to you as well. Alcohol, kind of the same type of a thing. You find yourself with, eating maybe some things that you wouldn't normally if you've had that second glass of alcohol, for instance. Sugar, artificial sweeteners. Now, what's interesting about sugar and artificial sweeteners is so often, you move into the next one where you see here processed foods, so often processed foods are filled with these sugar and artificial sweeteners. Now, I had an interesting conversation with my mom the other day, and we were talking about if she had anything in the house that was sweet. And she kind of paused and she said, you know what's funny? When I was a child, if my mom were to leave for a little while, I would go race into the kitchen, I would get a spoon, and I would eat a teaspoon of brown sugar. And I said, brown sugar? She said, well, think about it. There were no processed foods. I wasn't going to open the cabinet and find Ho-Hos and Twinkies and potato chips and cookies. That's not the way it was done. If you wanted a cookie or a pie, maybe you were lucky enough to have a nice bakery in town, or you just made it yourself. And so making something yourself is a whole different thing than what we have now, walking through the grocery stores and in our very own cabinets. So it's very, very different, isn't it, versus 100 years ago? I just want to make the point, our body hasn't caught up with that yet. Our body still is kind of operating on ancient times. Our body's not used to all this processed food. So we're taking in a ton of sugar and these artificial sweeteners. Make sure you read your food labels. Back to, I remember there was a Breyers commercial all these years ago, but they showed a little child reading the label of different ice creams. And if you can't pronounce something, it's a good idea to put it down if you don't recognize what it is. But processed foods are really a big problem. And then dairy and gluten. I want to pause here and say that everyone is very individual. Bodies are very, very different. One way that you can really tell how these foods are affecting you, the best way, the experts say, is to conduct your own experiment on your own body. And it's called a food elimination diet. What you do is you take these products out of your diet, and then you can add them back in one at a time after a certain period to see if they're affecting you. And I've been running a food elimination diet for probably about 8 years now, and people feel phenomenal when you take these energy changing foods out of your body. People feel more cognitively connected. They feel much higher mood. They just feel so much better physically. So I would encourage you to take a look at these foods and just play around with them a little bit. Once again, everybody is different, but these foods could be a contributor if you're not feeling so well. Choose foods with a life force. I love Michael Pollan. He talks about that we should eat foods that are plants and not foods that were manufactured in a plant. So if you take a look at this banana, it's going to rot. It has a life force. So if we mainly kind of lead with that, does the food that I'm taking into my body mainly have a life force? That's a pretty good way to go. I think many of you have probably, like myself, found yourself with a couple of French fries under your car seat, and months later you'll find that they're the same shape and they're the same form. And so this is an example of foods that are not going to rot on your counter. So let's talk about energy enhancing foods. People will say, okay, well, you've taken a lot of foods out, so what would you like me to add in? So we're talking about foods that are real and natural. Green leafy root vegetables, cruciferous vegetables should be the star of your plate. And luckily, we have summer coming up, so we should have some really delicious produce that will be available to us that's fresh and local as well. Fruits. Whole grains may work for some, beans may work for some, nuts and seeds, healthy oils and fats, mushrooms, sea vegetables, garlic and onions, and clean meats, fish and poultry. Again, this can be very, very bio-individual. Some people do better eating animal protein. Some people do better eating less or none. So here's the basic ingredient, I believe, for a healthy gut, but there are food sensitivities that do come into this, and it's really worth playing around with what diet works for you in the best possible way. So the Institute of Functional Medicine, I mentioned Dr. Mark Hyman. He is the head of the Institute of Functional Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic, and they are a group of medical practitioners that are looking at getting at the root cause of disease, which is absolutely so exciting and fabulous. They use this is one of their handouts that they give to their patients, and they tell the patients, we're looking for you to eat the rainbow. This is called the Eat the Rainbow exercise. And as you can see, each of the different food groups have different benefits that they bring. That's why it's important to be diverse with your diet. They can bring about they all are anti-inflammatory, but they can have anti-cancer effects. They can help at a cellular level. Some of them help in other areas a little bit, more strongly. So you can take a look at the bottom and you can see what some of the benefits of these different colored foods and what they have. So I love this here. Now you may say to me, okay, fine. So how am I going to do all of this? This is really overwhelming. You're telling me to eat more fruits and vegetables, 7 to 9 fruits and vegetables a day is a good guideline. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to prepare. So back to how things have been a little bit different over the last couple of weeks of our lives. I've had to shift and change the way I'm doing things as well. And sometimes we do find there are some very good shifts that we're able to bring into our lives. And this is one good shift. A client of mine reminded me of Misfits Market. And I took a picture, actually it was a couple days later, but a couple days later I took a picture of what I was able to get out of this Misfits Market box. They are organic fruits and vegetables from farmers who are not able to put these vegetables in the grocery store because they're a little bit blemished or they look a little funny. So they'll send you a whole big box of just kind of mystery vegetables. And you'll see that what I had already done to the left and the right, those baggies, I had immediately taken the green leafy vegetables out and I washed them and I put a paper towel in that bag and I put them in the refrigerator because preparation is key. I know if I had 6 different, leafy vegetables in the refrigerator and I opened it up, if it's time to make a salad, that might be too much work at that point in time. But if I already had this done, then I'm much more likely to go ahead and to make a healthy meal. So batch cooking, I have found, is the way to go. You can prepare ahead of time, soups and salads. You can, put sweet potatoes in a crock pot to be ready for your next meal. I like to roast vegetables. I'll prepare and cook my proteins. And after I do that, I'll kind of do it all at once. I might spend a few minutes each day doing this, or I might spend a little bit longer time, maybe every third or fourth day, just kind of having things ready to go in the refrigerator, because we know that if we've got habits in place, we're much more likely to just go ahead and move forward in a healthy type of way. So batch cooking is something that I'm a big fan of. This is what batch cooking might look like. On the left, you'll see that there's some broccoli being roasted, there's some sweet potatoes, some zucchini. So once again, doing a whole bunch of different foods all at once. Now, I cannot take credit for the left-hand side. That is not what my refrigerator looks like, but someone did a wonderful job of organizing and going ahead to the next step and filling their refrigerator with healthy foods. Probably this is someone who's working away from the home and they're gonna take those in for lunch. So that's kind of how batch cooking can work well for you. One of my favorite ways right now to eat the rainbow is smoothies. So we're talking about 7 to 9 vegetables a day. What's the easiest way to get them in? If you make a smoothie every morning, you're likely to get 3 to 4 fruits and vegetables into your system right away. And I felt the first time I started making smoothies consistently, literally I can feel, I mentioned to you that I have a lot of allergies. I can feel my allergies calm down. My nose will start to clear. Like I can feel the anti-inflammatory effects when I make a smoothie. So that's one of my favorite things to do. I created this smoothie for a juice bar on Cape Cod, and I created a whole batch of different smoothie recipes for them. But this Mango Rita is one that is still their very best seller. They sell the most of this one. This is what I use whenever I go into do corporate talks. I wish I could make a smoothie for you today because it always gets people talking. But this is delicious. I have a handout that Caroline is going to provide for you, and you'll find the recipe on the handout as well. So I'm going to use one of our favorite quotes from the Wellbeing Institute. Maria Swa likes to ask, if I were to give 5% more attention to my nutritional health, I would. So if you can fill in the blank by thinking about what we just talked about around nutrition, if you were to make one, let's just maybe say one slight shift in your nutrition, what would you do? And so Caroline, I'll ask if you can look at the chat.
We did have a question about what is gluten.
So gluten is a product that kind of holds grains together, and gluten can be sensitive for some people. I have found that oftentimes, so once again, if we look at our body 100 years ago, a lot of the foods that we were taking in, whether they had gluten in them or not, they were whole foods, they were whole grains. So gluten, for instance, is in pasta, it's in couscous. There's a lot of grains that have gluten in them in their whole form. But a lot of processed foods, what they have done is they've taken out the gluten from some of these other whole foods, and they've put it in the processed foods because it kind of helps with consistency and maybe makes things taste a little bit better. So it's something that it's become a problem lately because of how we have added it into our standard American modern diet. And some people have found themselves to be very sensitive to this.
And then there was also a question about stevia or truvia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Stevia is an actual, it's a great question because it's an actual herb. And stevia, it depends on who you're following. That's the funny thing about this world of nutrition. It's kind of hard sometimes because things change so much. But if you were to pick some stevia and put it in your tea to sweeten your tea, I think that's probably a pretty good way to go to get, you know, a little bit of your sweet tooth satisfied. Stevia comes from Japan, and so far it appears to be a pretty safe product. But yeah, it's probably, as far as, you know, what I've read recently, a decent way to, you know, satisfy your sweet tooth.
And then just to let you know what's going on in the chat, people are saying batch cooking, eat more vegetables, decrease the inflammation in my body, better prep, make smoothies, keeping more fruits and veggies in the house, batch cooking twice a week to feed me for a week or more salads and more mindfulness when eating, reduce, eliminate foods that are not, that's learn to like veggies and eat more of them. Carolyn said, live, reduce carbohydrates and increase vegetables. And
That's
then
wonderful.
more adventurous vegetable prep and cooking. That's another thing with COVID. I find some people are relying on their standards and they're like used to eating out or going to eating out or picking up food because they want to add variety. So that seems to be a challenge too. How do I add variety to my diet? Someone says, have things cut up and ready to use.
Uh-huh.
And then there's what is your opinion on glutathione and dioxidant quasi-vitamin? Glutathione, antioxidant.
Glutathione. Okay, yeah. So that's kind of a specific question. I don't as a health coach go into supplements in much detail. That might be something that a functional medicine practitioner could approach in a more targeted kind of way. But glutathione is a master hormone, and it's known to be very effective for some people if you need it. The problem that I seem to find with supplements is it's so hard to tell what your body needs right now. And there are people out there that do a better job than I do of helping to give specific advice around supplements, but glutathione has helped a lot of people. It just kind of depends. It can be very helpful for some people, and if you have some different health issues, it can maybe be a little too powerful right now as well.
And then there was your opinion on agave, teaspoon for coffee, okay?
Well, I think one way that I like to look at how we look at our nutrition is, what does the whole picture look like? Agave is a pure, it's a concentrated, it's sugar. But how does the rest of your day look? Is that pretty much, how you're getting your little taste of sugar throughout the day? And then if you're eating a mainly whole foods, healthy diet the rest of the day, I don't see a problem with that. But I think you need to take a look at your overall picture of your nutrition throughout the day. And like I said, if that's something that brings you joy and happiness, then that might be something that you should, go ahead and enjoy.
Now, one of the questions is really an interesting one, and we had Dr. Jonathan Aviv, who is an ear, nose, and throat specialist, who's actually identified the cause of acid reflux in the throat, esophageal reflux, and has felt that a lot of that has come from people eating too much acid or trying to create or live with an alkaline diet, i.e. apple cider vinegar and stuff like that. So someone was asking, what is an alkaline diet? Or can you talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question. Yes, so an alkaline diet is what we were talking about with the foods that we add into our bodies that are mainly green, that are mainly plant-based. Green leafy vegetables are one of the most alkaline foods that you can eat, kale being the top of the list. So yeah, eating an alkaline diet means eating real whole foods. Acid producing foods would include coffee, alcohol, maybe too much meat. I am a fan of grass-fed meats, but maybe someone that's just eating a lot of meat, sometimes that can cause a high acidity. Junk foods are very acid, sugar is very acidic. So an alkaline diet is definitely the way we were talking earlier, and a functional medicine approach of Eat the Rainbow.
Someone said, Anita said, honey better? I don't crave sweets except for organic dark chocolate.
Yeah, organic dark, a lot of these things are bio-individual, and it's sometimes dark chocolate is what I go towards as well. Some people will say it's very good for you as well if you have just a little piece. So it just depends. But yeah, absolutely. Those are all great comments, and it sounds like I have a very educated audience out there. I love it. I love all your questions.
And then finally, what is the benefits or detriments to the keto diet?
That is something that I probably would want to talk one off about. The keto diet is to work more towards a fat burning way of eating, and that would kind of get into a whole other area, but people have had some success with the keto diet. It's a very strict way of eating, and people have been able to reverse disease and kind of get back on the right track by implementing keto for a shorter term. So that's kind of a longer conversation, but there can be benefits to the keto diet as well.
And that is something, that is really, you're absolutely right, Sandy. We want to do that with a healthcare professional because that can have an impact on the kidneys, and it really should be done with a professional, actually. And then,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you for that reminder. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, please talk about how to reduce arthritis in our bodies.
I'll answer that, and then I'm going to move right on. As far as arthritis goes, once again, it might be a topic for, I could talk about nutrition the whole hour. We could go into the second
fine.
hour. Yeah, we could definitely do that. I do want to move on and talk a little bit about exercise as well, and meditation and sleep. But when we're talking about inflammation, arthritis does fall into the inflammation category. And if we are to eat anti-inflammatory foods, you might tell a definite difference with arthritis. The getting up and down off the floor, going up and down the steps. I've seen some major changes adding an anti-inflammatory diet in with people who have arthritis.
Before we go on, I wonder if for you, Sandy, what are the things that you notice that you have to pay attention to? We were talking about this earlier on the call, being health and wellness professionals, it's like, oh, I'm tending to do X, Y, and Z. Like, I'm not doing so much sugar or alcohol, but I notice that the chips and the pretzels are my kind of treat, if you would. And if I were to do one thing, my thing would be just a little bit more salads more often. Like, you can eat salad for breakfast.
Absolutely.
And how about for you?
Yeah, I found during periods of anxiety as we've been going through the last couple of months, I've been craving carbs myself. And one of the best things I think you can do if you're craving something is to eat a healthier version of that. So if you are craving sugar, then it might be a good idea to go eat a bowl of berries. I like to eat frozen berries, and sometimes I'll add some almonds on top and put some almond milk on it and make a little, little treat out of it. And then I'll check with myself, or am I satisfied? Am I okay now? And then maybe I don't need to move on to the next thing I might want to do, like the dark chocolate with the almond butter. So not that there's anything wrong with that, but maybe not all the time that's good for me. So if I was going for sugar, I might do that. If I was going for a carb, my go-to is sweet potatoes. I'll do sweet potatoes with some butter and some cinnamon, and oftentimes that will help me to really feel that I'm nurtured and I'm satisfied as well. And then I don't have the stomach upset, and then I feel better the next day.
Yeah, and Cheryl, thank you so much. She said, instead of chips, grab a handful of nuts. I grab those too.
Yeah.
But, for me, my treat is, some hummus and chips, or some hummus and, red pepper or something like that. And one last question before we move on. Is she familiar with lectins and inflammation?
So lectins are a chemical, I guess I'll call it chemical, that are present in fruits and vegetables, some fruits and vegetables in higher numbers. And so we're again talking about something that's kind of specific. And when we're looking at health, some people have found that they do better by avoiding some of those foods that are high in lectins. I've definitely been looking at that myself. I think it's a very interesting topic. Once again, the health and wellness field, the nutrition field, I should say, changes daily. And this person is probably very well read in the field, and she might be moving, into something that's a little more specialized. But it's definitely worth taking a look at, this idea of lectins. But thank you for all of those questions.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, because someone was talking about an acidic diet, and I just wanted to remind people what has happened is all of our packaged foods have to have a certain amount of acid in them. So for example, baby food bananas, like mushed bananas, have more acid in them than a regular banana. So we are getting a higher acid level in our diet anytime we eat anything that is not from a fruit or vegetable that in its form. And any iced teas, any colas, anything that's by law, it has to have a certain number of acids. So what's happening is we're finding that our tissues, our soft tissues, like our throat and esophagus and the sphincters that are linked, are often, people are what do I want to say, having acid reflux and those kind of things because of those processed foods. And Sandy, you know that because you had for so long those medications that you were prescribed for that. But the great thing is there's actually an acid watchers diet where you can eliminate the acid in your diet via the foods that you eat. And that's what's so powerful about your presentation, is that we really can take control of our system in a way. It's almost like mothering, isn't it? Like to nurture our system with healthy food, and then experiment to see what really works for us.
Oh yes, you're so right. You're so right. So we're talking about self-care, we're talking about being kind to ourselves, and we're talking about experimenting and being playful and not being afraid to give something a try, to see if, why not? The slide I showed you about how all of these different diseases are on the uptick. Why not try to see what you can do around nutrition, and then just keep a journal, see how you feel. Why not?
Great. And I know you have more for us on exercise and sleep, so let's go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for all of those comments. Let's talk a little bit about movement. I mentioned I like to say, let's move as opposed to be rigid about exercise, but I love this quote from Dr. John Rady. He says, exercise is like taking a little bit of Prozac and a little bit of Ritalin. So one of my favorite reasons why I love exercise is what it does for your attention and what it does for your energy level. And exercise speeds up the rate of neuronal growth. So it's making us a happier, a healthier person by moving our body. Now, part of the reason why this has become such a hot topic is because we're sitting so much. My grandparents, I have to tell you, didn't exercise, but they were very, very active people. My grandfather was a farmer, and they just moved around all day long. He didn't exercise. I think a lot from that generation, a lot of people didn't exercise. Now we're sitting down in front of a computer. Think about how different my life is versus my grandfather's. So we have an uptick on all these different, lifestyle problems. And then this was brought into my awareness by Dr. Axe. I thought this was interesting. So what even if you exercise regularly? And I found myself in this pit at one point. I would get up and very dedicated in going to an exercise class in the past in person for an hour every morning, but then I would come and sit down and create presentations like this for wonderful people like you. So I would spend most of the day sitting. So look at this. If I'm going to spend most of my day sitting and then I'm going to sleep for that many hours, look at how many hours I'm inactive. So trying to add activity in your life is definitely the way to go. I've found if you can get specific, what am I going to do? When am I going to do it? And where am I going to do it? This is my exercise mat. If I could show you right out the door here, it's my hallway. This is my living room, which has become my office in the last couple of weeks. But if you go into my hallway here, this is my exercise mat. I put it in the middle of the hallway so that I have to trip over it, reminding myself every day to do some stretches and a few exercises, in addition to my dedicated exercise that I do in the morning. But you have to kind of figure out right now what works for you. For me, I've had to shift to some online classes. I've tried to be really gentle with myself. I have some non-negotiables though, which is I need to get up every day, and first thing, whatever time I get up is fine, but I need to move my body for at least 30 minutes in some sort of a structured exercise kind of way. So I've started following my local YMCA where I usually would go work out, but I would take a 20 to 30 minute class. I don't have the attention span anymore for an hour class. So I'm gentle with myself. I walk afterwards, listen to podcasts, maybe talk to people who are nourishing to me. But it's important to figure out what you're going to do and then where and how, and to kind of stick with it. Dan Buettner's Blue Zones information. The world's longest lived people live in an environment that constantly nudges them into movement. So they're not doing what I'm doing, but they are constantly, gardening or walking, catching up with people. So so that's one thing to especially look forward to as we move into summer here. Being able to be outside and just move more, I think will be a benefit to all of us kind of as we are moving into this next phase coming out of the crisis that we have been in. But if you could just write down as well, if I were to give 5% more attention to my daily movement, I would. What would you do if you were to do just a little bit more of a nudge to help yourself out in the movement and exercise area? What would that look like? And I'm going to actually move on. We spent such a wonderful amount of time on nutrition. I'm going to go through the next couple of slides here, and then I might ask if I can swing back and see what people are going to do around the movement, as well as the sleep and the meditation. So the next important thing to look at is our sleep, and really understanding that in the past when we used to be, look at lack of sleep like I was being a productive person. I don't have time to sleep. I have things to do. We're now knowing that that's not really the best thing to do. Ariana Huffington has done a lot of research. She's from the Huffington Post. Ariana Huffington has done a lot of work around sleep deprivation and all the dangers that we can encounter if we're not sleeping as we should. Our bodies are meant to sleep. Once again, let's think about what our relatives were doing 100 years ago. They were going to bed with the sunset and they were waking up with the sunrise. They're getting a lot more sleep. This is a neat pictorial that the Huffington Post put out as well, showing some of the research-based studies and putting this into a pictorial about what happens when you don't get enough sleep. And you can just do a quick Google search if you'd like to see this, a little bit larger, because it's really a neat visual. But decreased sleep is associated, bottom line, with increased mortality. So something to look at. We do need to go through the different waves of sleep, and especially the deep sleep here, which tends to get worse as we get older. I don't know if many of you have experienced, some sleep deprivations just simply as you've gotten older like I have, but deep sleep is especially affected by alcohol and also by age. So what we can do is to maintain a regular sleep schedule. Try to go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, keep your room dark. And if you have a alarm clock that I used to have, it took me a while to realize it was disrupting my sleep, but it was green and it was a light, and that was a problem. Keep it cool, at least 65 degrees, avoiding alcohol and caffeine. We know that avoiding screens is a good idea. And if you can't get to sleep, or you wake up and you need to switch environments, do that as opposed to staying in bed, because you want your body to recognize that this bed is a place for sleep and not for tossing and turning. So those are some of the things that we can do. So if you were to give 5% more attention to your sleep hygiene, what would you do? And if you can just write that down. This might be something that we can swing back to in a minute. I'll ask for some of your thoughts on this. And then finally, we're going to talk about downshifting or meditating or mindfulness, however you'd like to look at this. But I'd like to introduce you to Matthieu Ricard. He's known as the world's happiest man. He's in his 70s now. He's a Buddhist monk. He's been a monk for most of his life. And he spends large portions of his day meditating. So the University of Wisconsin, Dr. Davidson, asked him to come in, and they wanted to study his brain and see what's going on with this man when he meditates. This is fascinating. So they hooked him up to 250 electrodes and took a look at his brain, and they found some remarkable things. One thing was, when I was showing you those sleep waves from a couple of slides before, he showed amazing gamma waves, and gamma waves are connected to REM sleep and to attention and to concentration and learning. And so he had very high levels of those. In addition, when they were looking at his prefrontal cortex, he had a huge amount of activity on the left prefrontal cortex, which is associated with positive emotions and with resiliency and kindness. They were doing a loving kindness meditation. He was doing a loving kindness meditation, and they saw this huge prefrontal cortex shift, which is what we want. We want a prefrontal cortex shift versus, being more on the right side, which is an area known as avoidance behaviors and negative behaviors. So what we know from Matthieu Ricard is that, yes, he spends the whole day, many days, meditating. But if we can just start a mindfulness practice of 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, just sitting and watching our breath, that we can also have some of these positive benefits that we will also realize as well. A fun little slide for you. But if you were to give 5% more attention to daily mindfulness, what would you do?
Some people are already adding into the chat.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'll ask for some, ask for some comments on the last three different interventions that we talked about, specifically around movement, sleep, and mindfulness, because you can see here on this final slide that we're covering these first four in our meds talk today: nutrition, movement, sleep, and mindfulness. But to wrap it all up, it's all about whole being health, isn't it? So we need to look at our relationships, self-care, hobbies, and interests as well, but they all go together. If we make one small shift in one area, you will see shifts in other areas as well, which is just so very wonderful.
Well, we're getting all kinds of things in the chat. Turn off all technology devices. How much alcohol blood level would be in a glass of wine? Someone wanted to know. Start winding down a bit earlier for better sleep.
Yes.
And then we've got some folks that are actually making some connections. If someone wants to walk on the Upper West Side, they're making some connection, that's great. We can meet. Not sure if naps are good. You might want to address that quick question, because naps are good, but go ahead, Sandy.
Naps are wonderful. It is interesting though. I've read information in both areas. I tend to believe that a 20-minute nap is a wonderful thing to incorporate, because I've read that we are multiphasic sleepers, and this is a good idea to incorporate a nap. I tend to benefit from a nap. There was another sleep expert I was following who didn't think that naps were great because they disrupted your sleep. That's a little, I'm not sure exactly where the research, if the research has agreed on that, but I think if you feel like a short nap helps with your attention and helps you get through the rest of the day, and it doesn't disrupt your sleep at night, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and I notice it with my parents who are now 83, that when they have a little nap, just a short cat nap, then they just have much more energy. And I noticed that in myself. I think it really goes back to that whole snowflake idea of we're all so unique, we're all so individual, that we want to be willing to take these elements of health that you've been talking about and not expect it necessarily to come from the outside, but to use what the experts are saying, and then become the expert of our own health, right? To have a relationship with not only what experts are saying, but with our own body, and listen to our own body. Would you say that's true, Sandy?
Yes, I would. I think that's a wonderful synopsis of all of this, Caroline, and that's exactly what I hope to impart, that everyone's different. Take bits and pieces of what resonates with you and, discard what doesn't work for you. It's all about health. It's all about happiness. And I'll just end by saying one of my favorite pictorials is based on something that Sean Aker said to Dr. Sean Aker, who's a positive psychologist, said to Oprah Winfrey. He was actually talking about optimism, but it can also relate to self-care. And that is that it's not so much of where your glass is right now, if we think of a glass in a water pitcher, but it's more about having that water pitcher, that set of tools from which to pour and refill that glass. So I'd like to just end by saying I hope that you have picked up a few extra tools, and I thank you so much for having me today. What a great group you have.
Thank you for joining us. It's just been a pleasure. And anybody have some final thoughts that they want to say? I know that Phoebe put in the chat she's going to be actually joining us tomorrow, Phoebe and Anthony Zippel, and they're going to be talking about mental health and well-being using positive psychology to help us thrive tomorrow. And then on Thursday, Alan Brown is back in the house, and Alan is a mindfulness educator, and he's in the schools, but he's also going to be talking about, okay, now we're going to go outside. What next? Like, how do we manage that? So everyone, please stay tuned. Please join us again. And Sandy, they were asking whether they will be able to have your presentation, or is the handout something different? Can you let us know?
Handout something different. I have a quiz from Dr. Mark Hyman's book. It's called What the Heck Should I Eat?, which I think is a wonderful book. And it's a quiz on just some of the top misconceptions around food. And I've also included my recipe for the mango smoothie. I was also asked to include recipes. I wanted to direct people to my website, honestly. If you're interested in more recipes, I have a lot of really great recipes on sandycampbell.net. So if you're looking for more around that, I would probably suggest going there.
And I believe that Phoebe put that in the chat so that people can get it says, can she send the chart of veggie foods to eat? Okay, a lot of people want those charts.
It's
I
a good chart.
understand.
Yeah.
And someone else is like, can you send the rainbow group?
Right, it's good. I know it's good
It's good.
information.
Yeah.
We'll see what we can do.
So what we're going to do is unmute so everybody has a chance to say goodbye and thank you. So let me unmute.
No, I
everybody.
don't. Wait for you.
So thank you so much, Sandy. It was an excellent
Love you.
presentation.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Carol.
Everybody, thank you.